Hello everyone. Welcome back to English Nest, a quiet place where stories teach, inspire, and help you grow both in English and in life. Today, I want to tell you the story of a young boy named Daniel. It is a simple story, but inside its simplicity, there is a truth that many people forget, a truth about patience, about loss, and about the quiet, steady power of never giving up. So, sit back, breathe slowly, and let the story begin. Daniel was 12 years old, and he lived in a small, dry town called Millfield, somewhere in the middle of America, where the summers were long and the rains were rare. The town was surrounded by flat, dusty land. Not much grew there. Most people worked hard just to survive, and most children in Millfield dreamed of leaving one day, of going somewhere greener, somewhere better, somewhere full of life. But Daniel was different. Daniel loved the earth. He loved the smell of soil after a rare summer rain. He loved watching tiny green shoots push up through dry ground. And more than anything, he loved trees. His grandfather, a quiet old man named Harold, had taught him everything about trees. Every evening, they would sit together on the porch, and Harold would point to the single old oak tree growing in their yard and say softly, "Daniel, my boy, that tree has been standing since before your father was born. It has seen droughts, it has seen storms, but it never stopped growing. That is what a strong soul does. It never stops growing." Daniel would nod and stare at the oak tree with wide, wondering eyes. Those were his favorite evenings. But one autumn, when Daniel was 12, Harold passed away quietly in his sleep. Daniel felt a deep, heavy sadness, the kind that sits in your chest like a stone and does not move easily. He missed his grandfather's voice. He missed their evening talks. He missed the way Harold made everything feel possible, even in a dry and dusty town like Millfield. For several weeks, Daniel barely spoke. He went to school, came home, sat on the porch alone, and stared at the old oak tree. One morning, his mother, a gentlewoman named Clara, sat beside him and placed her warm hand on his shoulder. "Daniel," she said softly, "your grandfather loved you very much, and he always said the best way to honor someone you love is to keep growing." Daniel looked at her with sad eyes and whispered, "But how, Mom? How do I keep growing when everything feels so still?" Clara smiled quietly and replied, "Plant something." Those two simple words stayed with Daniel all day. Plant something. That afternoon, he walked to the small shed behind their house and found a handful of old seeds in a dusty tin, seeds his grandfather had saved from years ago. They were dry, they looked forgotten, some were cracked. Daniel held them in his palm and thought, "These look like nothing. They look like they are finished." But Harold always said the smallest seed carries the biggest possibility. So Daniel decided he would plant every single one. He found an empty patch of dry ground at the edge of their yard, just past the old oak tree. He knelt down, and with his bare hands, he began to dig. The earth was hard. His fingers ached. The sun beat down on his back, but he did not stop. He planted each seed carefully, one by one, pressing them gently into the ground as if he were placing something precious into a safe place. When he finished, he watered the patch slowly and sat back on his heels, looking at the flat, silent earth in front of him. Nothing. Just brown, quiet ground. Daniel breathed slowly and whispered to himself, "Okay, now I wait." The waiting was the hardest part. Days passed, then a week, then 2 weeks. Every morning before school, Daniel came to the patch, knelt down, and looked closely at the soil. Nothing seemed to be changing. The ground looked the same, dry, flat, and still. At school, his classmates were talking about video games and weekend plans. His best friend Marcus noticed Daniel seemed far away. "Still thinking about those seeds?" Marcus asked one afternoon as they walked home. "Yeah," Daniel replied. Marcus shrugged. "My dad says nothing grows well in Millfield. The land is too dry." Daniel was quiet for a moment, then said, "My grandfather grew that oak tree here. He said any land can grow something if you care for it long enough." Marcus looked uncertain, but he said nothing more. That night, Daniel sat under the oak tree in the cool evening air and looked up through the wide, dark branches at the stars above. He could almost hear his grandfather's voice, low and steady. "Patience is not waiting, Daniel. Patience is believing while you wait." He closed his eyes and held on to those words. On the 18th morning, a quiet Thursday, Daniel came outside as usual and knelt beside the patch. And then he saw it. One tiny green shoot, barely the size of his thumbnail, pushing up through the dry earth, thin and fragile and absolutely beautiful. Daniel stared at it for a long time without moving. Then, very slowly, he smiled. It was the first real smile he had felt since his grandfather passed away. He ran inside and called, "Mom! Mom, come look!" Clara came outside, still holding her morning cup of tea, and when she saw the tiny shoot, her eyes grew soft and warm. "There it is," she said gently. Daniel crouched beside it and whispered, "It was in there the whole time, waiting, just like I was waiting." Clara put her hand on his back and said, "Just like you were." From that morning, everything began to slowly change for Daniel. He did not become happy all at once. Grief does not work that way. But something shifted quietly inside him, like a window opening in a room that had been closed too long. He began caring for the patch every single day with full attention. He watered it in the early morning before the sun grew too hot. He removed dry weeds that tried to crowd the young shoots. He read old gardening books from the town library to learn how to protect the plants through the heat. One by one, more shoots appeared. Then more still. By spring, the patch was alive with small green plants, some tall, some short, some flowering, some still stretching toward the light. People in the neighborhood began stopping to look. An old woman named Mrs. Patterson, who lived across the road, walked over one afternoon and said with a soft smile, "I haven't seen anything grow on that patch in 30 years, son. What is your secret?" Daniel looked at the plants and said simply, "I didn't stop." Mrs. Patterson nodded slowly, as if those words carried the weight of something she had been thinking about for a long time. "That," she said quietly, "is the biggest secret of all." Word spread through Millfield the way small-town news always does, quietly, slowly, and then all at once. People heard about the boy who was growing things on the dry patch of land near Harold's old house. Some came to look out of curiosity. Others came because they needed to see something hopeful in a town that had begun to feel like nothing ever changed. Daniel's teacher, a kind man named Mr. Ellis, came by one Saturday morning and stood looking at the garden for several minutes before he spoke. "Daniel," he said, "have you ever thought about making this bigger?" Daniel looked at him. "Bigger?" Mr. Ellis smiled. "This town hasn't had a community garden in years. People here need green spaces. They need places that feel alive. Do you think you could help build something like that?" Daniel's heart beat a little faster. He thought of his grandfather, of the old oak tree, of the single small seed he had pressed into the earth on a sad afternoon months ago. He said, "I think I could try." What followed was not easy. Building a community garden in a dry town with very little money and no experience takes a great deal of effort. Daniel learned that quickly. There were days when the water supply ran short, and the young plants looked pale and tired. There were days when the older residents of Millfield shook their heads and said, kindly but honestly, "It's a sweet idea, son, but this land just doesn't want to grow things." There was one particularly hard afternoon in midsummer, when a sudden dust storm swept through Millfield and damaged a large section of the garden. Daniel walked through the broken plants with his hands in his pockets and felt the old familiar weight returning to his chest. He sat down on the ground right there, among the damaged plants, and was still for a long time. Then he thought of something Harold had once said, sitting on the porch, watching the oak tree sway in a summer storm. "A tree does not fight the wind, Daniel. It bends. And then, when the storm passes, it stands up straight again." Daniel breathed in, then out. He stood up, picked up his garden tools, and started again. Slowly, steadily, the garden came back. And this time, Daniel did not work alone. Marcus came to help on weekends. Mrs. Patterson brought seeds she had been keeping in her kitchen drawer for years, saying she had always hoped to find the right place for them. Mr. Ellis brought students from school. Even some of the older residents who had once shaken their heads came by on quiet mornings and asked if they could help. The garden grew, and as it grew, something else grew too. Something invisible but real. A feeling in Millfield that things could change, that dry ground could come alive, that one person, working steadily and refusing to stop, could shift the mood of an entire community. By the time Daniel was 14, the community garden had become one of the most loved places in Millfield. Families brought their children there on Sunday afternoons. Elderly residents sat on the benches Daniel and Marcus had built and watched the colors of the flowers move slowly in the breeze. And right at the center of the garden, surrounded by everything that had grown from nothing, stood a young oak tree, planted by Daniel on the day the garden officially opened, in memory of his grandfather Harold. One warm evening, Daniel sat alone beside the young oak tree as the sun went down behind the hills. The garden was quiet. The air smelled of earth and flowers and something clean. He looked at the oak tree, still small, still young, but standing straight and steady in the earth. And he thought about everything that had grown from those dry, forgotten seeds in the old tin in Harold's shed. He thought about the sadness he had felt, the waiting, the slow, uncertain mornings, the damaged plants, the days he almost stopped. And then he thought about that first tiny green shoot, pushing up through hard earth on a quiet Thursday morning, so small, so fragile, so full of life. He smiled and spoke quietly to the young tree, as if his grandfather could hear through the bark and the roots and the soil below. "I kept growing, Harold," he said, "just like you told me." And somewhere in the rustling of the leaves above him, Daniel felt, very softly, very gently, that his grandfather was smiling too. Daniel's story teaches us something quiet and beautiful. It teaches us that grief is real, and it is okay to feel it deeply. But grief does not have to be the end of the story. It can be the beginning of one. It teaches us that seeds, whether they are planted in earth or planted in the heart, need patience, they need care, and they need someone who believes in them, even when nothing is visible yet. It teaches us that you do not need perfect conditions to begin. You do not need rich soil, or plenty of rain, or a big plan. You only need to start, and then to keep going, one quiet day at a time. And it teaches us this above all: the things we build out of love and loss, the gardens, the stories, the lives we slowly shape with our own hands, these are the things that last the longest and shine the brightest. So here are 4 quiet truths from Daniel's story to carry with you. 1. Growth often begins in sadness. The deepest roots come from the hardest ground. 2. Patience is not waiting and doing nothing. Patience is believing while you work. 3. One person's quiet effort can change the feeling of an entire place. 4. The best way to honor the people you love and have lost is to keep growing, in their memory, and for your own beautiful future. Thank you so much for listening today. I hope Daniel's story brought something warm into your heart, and perhaps a little more courage into your day. If this story touched you, please do 3 small things that mean a great deal to me. Hit that like button so this story can reach more people who need it today. Subscribe to English Nest and tap the bell so you never miss our next story. A new one comes every single week. And share this video with one person, a friend, a family member, anyone who might be going through something difficult right now and needs a quiet reminder that growth is always possible. Your one small click helps me bring more stories like this to people all around the world. Thank you, from the bottom of my heart, for being here. You are the reason these stories exist. See you in the next one. Stay patient, stay growing, and always remember, even the smallest seed carries the biggest possibility. Take care.